Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we conclude our 5-day program on human flourishing. Today, looking at individual flourishing. Before we begin our program, I want to continue our meditations and contemplation of the genocide that is taking place in Gaza, from which we cannot look away. Several days ago on Valentine's, I posed the question of what does love mean in a time of genocide? And I continued my reflections yesterday, and I've continued to ponder this extraordinary complexity that love is everywhere, knitting all things together. And that's how the cosmos coheres as one. That's what keeps everything in harmonious wholeness. Even the most wicked of evil, genocide being the crime of crimes, to the most sublimely graceful. I want to start, given the topic of today, with some individual stories that have happened over the last 24 hours in Gaza, in Khan Yunis Hospital, where the Israelis, after several weeks of laying siege and shooting hospital staff and doctors and children and women, they stormed the hospital yesterday. And today they ordered the entire evacuation of one of the largest hospitals in Gaza, where over 10,000 people had congregated, hoping that if they were close to a hospital, they would be spared, but knowing they would not be, because the Israelis have destroyed every single hospital in Gaza and virtually every school. Any human infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed. And most of the population of Gaza, as we know, are huddled in the southern portion near the city and around and in the city of Rafah, as Israel prepares its final onslaught. Two quick stories. The Israelis blew up the obstetrics rooms in the hospital. A number of the women were in late stages of labor. They were forced out of the building. And in the rubble, without nurses or doctors, they just squatted in the midst of the bedlam and gave birth to two children. One wonders of their fate. Another story of an old woman, wizened with time, looked to be probably in her 70s, sitting on rubble, crying out that she had been pulled from her kidney dialysis machine and now doesn't know whether she'll live. Her husband was there. He was very elderly, as she is, blind. And as they were staggering out of the hospital, the Israelis arrested him and took him away. I'm reminded of the story that Elie Wiesel tells in his autobiographical account of being a young boy in Auschwitz. He remembers, as he recounts it later in his book, that two men and a young boy were caught stealing bread and were sentenced to death. And so everybody in the camp was lined up to watch the hanging of the two men and the young boy. The two men died quickly. The young boy was so thin, so light, he didn't have enough body weight to die through strangulation. And his body kept jerking on the gallows. And Wiesel remembers that even the Germans became mesmerized by this body of a little boy spasming, not quite dying on the gallows. And a voice from one of the men near Elie Wiesel cried out, "Where is God? Where is God?" And there was silence. Then Elie Wiesel heard another voice behind him, which said, "God is here. God is hanging on the gallows." And that's worth contemplating as we think of where love is, where God is. That God is with those two women that gave birth today in the rubble. And God is with the woman torn from her dialysis machine and with her husband led away in his blindness by the executioners. And what I've been pondering is that if love binds all that together, what is it for? If out of the greatest darkness, light emerges, what is the purpose of this level of suffering, particularly within the context of the Israelis now doing to the Palestinians what the Germans did to the Jews? So that we're caught in a great, what Jung would call an entheodromia, an irony and a tragedy that makes what's happening in Gaza, as I've said many times, a trans-historical event because of the deep layers of historical and biblical, religious complexity that are being played out. And last night, as I tried to think, what is all this for? I was led back to Plato's Symposium. And I just want to tease one aspect out for our consideration about love in a time of genocide. And Plato sculpts through this dialogue what has been called by scholars the ladder of love. For Plato, the foundation of all love is eros, that generativity of the cosmos itself that produces life. That ultimately, says Plato, love emanates from life itself, that aspect of life which is generative of more life. That's the origin of love. And as love ascends the ladder, as we move from self-love to love of community, to love of institutions, to love of the world, to love of the cosmos, to love of wisdom, we ascend the ladder, he says, until finally we realize that even love has something else to which it bends the knee. That love is an instrument. It's not an end of all things. It is that which binds all things, the light and the dark, the categories of time, space, and causality, fashions them with exquisite grace and offers them on the altar of beauty. And that's what makes the universe so beautiful. It's being bound together by love for beauty. And when I thought that thought and contemplated that teleology of love, I realized that though the grief in my heart for what's going on, for both Jew and Palestinian, cousins of the house of Shem, Semites all, the grief that we feel at what's being played out is framed with this agonizing, laborious struggle, as Chekhov said, to squeeze the slave out of ourselves. I think it's only the ancient Greek playwright Aeschylus that captured in a single sentence the agony of what we contemplate when we think of Gaza and we think of the ladder of love. Drop by drop, he says, drop by drop, pain that cannot forget falls upon the heart, until in our despair, against our will, comes wisdom by the awful grace of God. Drop by drop, pain that cannot forget. Who can forget two pregnant women squatting in the rubble and the dust and the gunfire and the dynamite and giving birth to life? That's the work of love. That pain falls upon the heart until in our despair, against our will, comes wisdom by the awful grace of God. So thank you, everyone, for joining Humanity Rising today as we contemplate human flourishing in our time. I would like to now welcome my very good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who's the co-convener with Carson Kelly of our program this week. Tom, I turn the program over to you with many thanks for all you do.
Well, thank you, Jim. And once again, you continue to raise the bar, and I'm at a loss for words for what you just shared. It speaking to beauty, speaking to love, it's the essence of the universe. And I'm not sure how to bridge that into today's conversation other than to say that it's a beautiful reminder that we've got 8 billion plus people living on the planet, and so many of us are thriving in many ways. And it's because of love, it's because of beauty that we're surrounded by, and the constant reminder that that there is so much beauty, there is so much love in the world. And as long as we keep our attention and our focus on that, it doesn't alleviate the suffering of what's happening in Ukraine. It doesn't alleviate the suffering that's happening in the Gaza Strip. It doesn't alleviate the suffering that's going on in the world. And yet, if we can keep our attention on love, on beauty, on human thriving, it's the reality about the nature of the universe. And I'm particularly excited to have with us today, thank you, Carson Kelly, for organizing today 3 panelists who are going to help remind us once again of thriving in the world. And so I'll turn it over to you, Carson, for introductions and today's conversation.
Thank you, Tom. Echo your sentiment, and am also very appreciative of, to your point, of the folks that are going to join us today. Thank you, Jim, again for your words, and I echo Tom's sentiment. Again, I watched the elevation of your thoughts and your reflections has just continued to grow over the week, and it's been a privilege to be able to see those and to hear them. So thank you. Also, thank you again for the invitation, both from Jim and from Tom, to be a part of the Humanity Rising podcasting. I really appreciate the opportunity to bring forward colleagues this past week, and then with 3 more today, that are all doing amazing work and in doing it in a service to a more compassionate and ultimately a more flourishing world. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Carson Kelly, and I'm the founder of Compassion 2.0. Compassion 2.0 is a collection of professionals who are trying to scale compassion through the intentional architecture of compassionate human experience that can be measured and evaluated. We do this through the creation of both a compassionate and flourishing frameworks brought through product development and/or organizational architecture. Community consists of a number of different types of folks, organizational developers, HR leaders, product developers, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, medical doctors, UX, UI designers, entrepreneurs, VCs, individual mindfulness teachers, and more. In this past week, we've been looking at modern flourishing from the perspective of the global north, and we recognize that our modern organizations and culture and society have where we find ourselves, needless to say, created great challenges. There's so much pain, so much division. The numbers around mental illness and loneliness and depression are going off the charts. They're at their highest recorded times that they've since these recordings or numbers have been recorded. So we know that we have a lot to learn, particularly from folks in the global South who don't face a lot of the same things that we have faced as a result of what we've created. So we hope to continue today, at least, in looking at some of the wisdom that we can bring forward to help our cultures. This past week, we've touched on a bunch of different things. For those that have been with us, we've looked at how funding of organizations that are with entrepreneurs and teams that are trying to create beneficial things in the world, how the relationship to money and flourishing can be brought forward and have downstream impact and benefit. We've been looking at neuroscience around aesthetic chills and maladaptive schemas with our friends from the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Studies, as well as doctors from C&D Health who are looking at individual resonance through the discovery of people's core values. Looked at group dynamics and pro-social teaming, and yesterday we looked at ancient wisdom in a modern frame, and so today we're turning our attention to individual practices, both from a natural perspective or what we can learn from nature, and also how, say, flourishing shows up again in organizations, and from a chief heart officer, which I'm really excited to talk to about. So we hope the listener will come away from this week with a sense of different modalities or pathways that might resonate with them, and that might increase their own sense of self-compassion and then ultimately compassion for others, and to create a more flourishing frame for all of us. The views expressed so far by the individuals are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. And I've asked our guests to join this conversation today in a professional manner to discuss and share their work with their listeners. All that being said, today I'm joined by several really amazing people. And so you can join me if you like. Claude Silver is joining. She's the Chief Heart Officer at Vaynermedia, which we'll get into. And just to let everyone know, Claude has graciously joined us while she's traveling. And so she's taken the Herculean effort to be able to be with a conversation with us. But let's be mindful and grateful that she's in an airport. So thank you, Claude, for doing that. Also joined too by Mark Coleman, who's a mindfulness teacher and a wilderness guide and author, as well as Lori Schwanbeck, who's a psychotherapist and also a mindfulness teacher. So welcome all of you to Humanity Rising. It's great to see all of you. So what I'd love to do is turn our attention to Claude. It looks like she might be stationary or even on an airplane. So Claude,
yeah, we made it.
Up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's it mean to be a Chief Heart Officer, and how did that come about? How did you get attracted to that? And like such an unusual title. So tell us about that.
I'd love to, and I want to just thank Jim, Tom, and Carson for having me today, and forgive the fact that I'm on an airplane, but we'll make it happen. My name's Claude Silver. I'm the Chief Heart Officer at Vaynermedia, which is a digital advertising company. I've been in advertising for a really long time. Have no idea how I got here. I think it was luck. 1998, San Francisco, boom. I have always been someone that is devoted to helping people thrive, moving people out of shame and their limiting beliefs and imposter syndrome and into a place of flourishing, which of course is a journey that takes a lifetime. I was a strategist, studied to be a psychotherapist for a long time, and found my way into the world of advertising, and just knew that I would always be a team builder. I spent a lot of time in my 20s and 30s figuring out how I wanted to show up every day, what worked for me, and then of course seeing how that worked for people around me as I led very large teams around the globe. I met my boss, who's Gary Vaynerchuk. Some people may know him on the screen, social media kind of influencer, and very, very smart man. And I met him when I was living in London, working on advertising, and he moved me to New York. And we really hit it off with this wonderful belief in humans, in possibility, in optimism, not toxic possibility, but what I call emotional optimism, which is really the understanding and the acceptance that emotions happen, that life does happen, and it may take us down for a day, an hour, or 3 months, or 3 years, but there is a tomorrow, and that tomorrow is our choice. And tomorrow is also, we get there with the help of support, of teams, of colleagues, of community. Gary knew that I wanted to spend my days helping people find their aha and breaking through to the other side of whatever that may be. And we created this role, the Chief Heart Officer role. Heart, why? Well, human beings have a heart. That's our central nervous system. And of course, human beings are the central nervous system to any organization. We are not assets. We are the organization. People come into our organizations with their own mess, an exquisite mess, as we all have. I appreciate that and enjoy that mess. I enjoy wading through the water with them and being a passenger in their journey, which I consider to be empathy, a passenger riding shotgun with them. Culture, to me, the root of culture is the word cultura, which I love because it is the cultivation of the soul. And I do believe cultures have a soul. I do believe that. And that soul could be fearful, and that soul could be angry, and that soul could be delightful and happy and motivating, whatever that may be. I am dedicated and devoted to creating cultures where people feel that they can be safe, they can connect, and they can find a place to belong. I want them to belong because that's where the flourishing happens. That's where the magic happens. And so I spend my day with people in one-on-ones. I spend my day listening to people and helping them hear what maybe they just said. I spend my day with big teams, strategic visioning, all of that stuff. And I love it. It's a labor. It's not even a labor. It's not a job for me. It's me. So I want to thank you for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining. Just if you have a few more minutes, like I said, before the plane actually takes off, I have to say, Gary Vaynerchuk has always been an inspiration to me. He's had such an interesting career, but the thing that he really speaks to that I see, at least in his LinkedIn posts, is really, to echo what you said, or to frame it in a way that I would suggest, is he is way beyond the idea of humans as resources, humans as extracting, humans as cogs in a machine of value that creates, profits, essentially, and has been one of those early business voices, at least that I've encountered at scale, that does talk about people being seen and talks about people as being whole humans and so forth. And it feels like he's really genuine about that. And I wonder, if you could just give me a sense or share with us, how has that shown up in the culture? If we walk around a typical office, and I know there's offices all over the place. It's a very large company, lots of different things. But if we were in one of the offices somewhere, what might we experience that we wouldn't say experience in a more, quote, traditional landscape?
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Great. Thank you. He is true blue, by the way. What you see is what you get. I should say, I'm going to back up for a second. When we created this role, I asked him what success looked like, of course, because there is no role like this. And this is my only job description. It is to touch every single human being and infuse the agencies with empathy. And so that was mine to figure out how to scale that.
Nice.
How to scale that and how to offer that to anyone, because I don't believe there's just one Chief Heart Officer. I believe we all have that within us. And if we want to pursue that and be in service of others, then climb aboard. I work for 2,000 people. No one works for me. And that works for me, that I can be in service. So building the culture and creating this bottom up culture rather than top down has been something I've spent 10 years doing with him, almost 10 years now. When you walk into our offices, you will feel a jolt of energy. You will feel that we are going somewhere. And I've been in advertising for a very long time and know that you don't feel that when you walk in every office. There is a place we are going to. We may not know where we're going, but we're not staying stagnant. We're not yesing a client. We are blooming and blossoming with one another, trying to make each other better. And then, of course, to attract our end user, which is the consumer on TikTok or Instagram or anything like that. What I love is that all of us are motivated by progress. Every single one of us. Feedback is needed. Feedback is very difficult to both hear and deliver, as we know. So I work on a lot of trainings that way. But in order for us to move forward, and more in order for this motivation and the adrenaline that you feel walking into the office to actually work, we must get better at understanding that feedback is a gift. There is a way to deliver it with kindness and with candor. Our culture is called the honey empire internally. Honey empire. Honey is 51%. Empire is 49%. That 1% of how we make people feel and how we show up and how we choose to show up is everything. Everything.
It's fascinating. You know, one of the things that we're going to talk about, Claude is joining Compassion 2.0 at a conference called Transform. And we are discussing the Compassion 2.0 thesis on the science of flourishing and the ROI of care. And we've been working with really brilliant people shifting our model from an extractive frame of human resources to a generative frame. And the metaphor we've arrived at is actually the root of the word flourishing, namely flourish or flower. And we think that rather than thinking about, you know, organizations as a machine with cogs and mechanisms and, you know, dials and knobs and so forth, that an organization is much more like an English garden, in the sense that it consists of a bunch of different flowers that of individuals, is the metaphor, of course, different sizes and shapes and smells and colors, and attracts different kinds of pollination and so forth. And that there's a substrate of the culture of the company, which is the policies and the procedures and the technologies and so forth. And by nourishing or providing flourishing elements of practices of self-compassion and empathy and or self-awareness or what have you, there's a variety of different things, that ultimately those flowers will then, the energy comes from the roots and so forth and comes up and is expressed through the flower, right? And I'm wondering if you agree with that as a metaphor, but because I'm kind of guessing you might, is that energy that you're talking about in the sense of showing up and walking through a Vayner office space or what have you, that it's kind of this pouring forth? Is that kind of what I'm understanding? And I'm wondering if there's a similar analogy or the flowering.
Yeah. So the flower, I often talk about our culture being that of flowers, of a garden of flowers, where we are inclusive, and each and every flower and each and every petal is unlike anything else. And without that diversity, it's just a red flower or a green flower. We need all of those flowers. I also relate it to a minestrone soup. You have to put the bay leaf in. You have to put the oregano in, or it'll taste different. So I definitely speak in metaphors, but what you will feel, and look, it's not utopia, and we know that because we're dealing with people and we're dealing with egos and all of the rest. But what you will feel is that people are rooting for each other. That's what you will feel more of than less of. You will feel I actually think the word I'm looking for is people leaning over each other to help them bloom. Because when you win, Carson, I win. And when I win, you win. And it's a we, not I culture. I think the last thing I'll say is I don't come from the world of HR. So when I first took this role, I told Gary that I don't come from HR, and he said, fine, you'll hire a great HR team, which I have. But I immediately changed the name from HR, because I don't know what that means, to people and experience, because I do know what that means. So we are the PET team, the people and experience team. We are not an HR team. Yes, we still have to deal with some policies and work visas and all kinds of stuff that you know that HR teams deal with, but this is with a different slant. We are partnership and in service of the people. Yeah, that is a very, very big distinction, and the only way I could do it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We're working on a thesis too, a Compassion 2.0 around a chief flourishing officer. So the concept of someone, I think, that's doing what you're speaking to, and also, and I'm not saying you don't, but because I don't know, but also combines a deep ROI, return on investment framework to present to the rest of the organization why this flourishing individuals of, a frame of a English garden bed or English garden rather is financially beneficial. And it sounds to me like you're starting to see that at Vayner. It sounds to me like all of those dynamics are in place, and people see that, and the model seems to be flipped now. So from an extractive, fear-based frame to a generative supporting frame, and I know that I can see more and more passengers coming onto the plane, so I anticipate you're not going to be able to be with us much longer. That being said, I'm curious to know, just very briefly, what is the role that you, if any, that you found, how to say, about being seen and in creating culture where people are seen, and how do you, if at all, facilitate the seeing, not just from you, of course, but you have 2,000 people in the organization. So of course you can't personally see them all, but how is the culture, how does that component show up at Vayner?
And I'll say two ways, Carson. The first and foremost is, as I needed to scale this very quickly when I took this role on, I found people in other offices that had a similar DNA, that were Vayner citizens, if you will, already, that they had the belief in people, that they would go and spend 15 minutes and do a walk and talk. And I call them culture champions. They have a day job, but they are people I rely on every single day in Bangkok, in Singapore, in France, in LA, because I can't get to those places. And I know that they will calm the system. They will soothe, they will invite and include these people into their ecosystem, because it's all about connective tissue, all of it. That's how this culture works. So that's really the first thing, is leaning on other people. The second thing really dovetails is I'm not right. I don't have the answers. I really don't. I'm a student. I'm learning from people. None of us have the answer. And when you enter into a conversation, create and hold space for other people, knowing it's not about you, not about me, and I don't have to have the answers, it lets that anxiety off the hook. We're going to find solutions together. Or, my friend, I will go meet with these 5 people and see if I can find solutions for you, and then bring you into the conversation. But it's never about me. It's never, ever about me. It is about them. And that's, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. That way, to continue the garden metaphor, it's regenerative, as you said, and we're constantly feeding. We're constantly tilling the soil, if that's the right word. We're constantly, mixing up the fertilizer, whatever that is, to get the best of the best. And if it's not the best of the best, if it's not an A+ player or an A player here, we will help them find another role within the company or outside of the company where we know that they can succeed. And that's called our alumni program. But people and experience starts when they first apply to the job, throughout their entire tenureship, and then some. And it's a way for us to all pour into one another. And the majority of us have been at this company from 4 years onward. We've been around 14 years. We still have employee number 1 and 2 here. That's pretty awesome. We're going someplace. Yeah, we're doing something, and we're doing HR and culture in a very different way, which is with empathetic leadership, heart-based, and looking for that ROI. What is the ROI of empathy in the workplace? What is the ROI of care in the workplace? What is the ROI of letting you know with my actions and my words that you matter to me? It's not just that you bring me value because we won that pitch. You matter to me as a human being. And that's gold.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I want to leave a tiny bit of space for Tom, but I would also like to say that what I'd like to talk to you further about at some point in Vegas or whenever we get a chance, is the notion of care as it comes from Gary to you, to the rest of this organization, is this, it's this generative energy, this love, quite frankly, that's coming through and is explicit. So it really does flip that model from extraction and extractive framing coming from the top, trying to pull value, as opposed to this heart source that's pushing it through all the way to the point where you can, be caring in your alumni as, potentially people have to move into something that's a better fit for them. But that, it seems like it all carries all the way through. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. And it is with love.
Yeah.
That's with love. It's
Yeah.
with love. And it's not going to be for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, I just saw a question, how do I meet with resistance? Because there's resistance every day because we're humans. And you don't want me to get too close and give you feedback. I'm making a story up. You don't want your manager, no, you don't know me. No. So we have to come at this with kindness. We have to come at resistance, knowing that I'm meeting with someone who may have had the worst morning ever. Their dog could be in the hospital. Their mom could be, it's life. And so how am I speaking to them so that they hear me and they feel the kindness, they feel the warmth, they feel the fact that I already trust them. They don't have to prove anything to me. I just want to be helpful. And right now, as we all know, we're facing a lot of mental illness, a lot of disability ability in the workplace. And this is something that's incredibly important for us to be conscious and aware of, and how we meet people, where we meet them on their journey, not my journey.
That's beautiful, Claude. Tom, any last thoughts? If not, no worries, but I just want to let Claude go, and because I can only imagine the challenge that you're facing right now. I just so appreciate your willingness to do this. So Tom, any thoughts here?
Yeah, just a quick comment and question for you. I've got a dear friend, Bob Zimmer, who was the founder, CEO of the Rosewood Hotel chain. And for those of you who know the hospitality industry, there's the what's called the quote unquote front of the house, which is where the clientele show up and go to the reception area. And then there's, in the industry, it's called the back of the house, where all the supplies and where the staff, work, et cetera. And when Bob founded the chain of hotels, he called the back of the house the heart of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture and the leadership of the organization embraced that was the heart of the house. And if you didn't take care of the heart, then the front of the house, the customer experience wouldn't work. And what I'm hearing in what you're talking about, Claude, is very much that the leadership and the culture is focused on the heart. But within any organization, there's so many levers: performance management, compensation, promotion, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm really curious, what are some of the levers that you're pulling beyond culture and leadership to reinforce that embracing of the heart?
Yep. Thank you. We rolled out something called core competencies that the team worked on for about a year. Core competencies are behaviors, foundational. Our expectations on how you will behave in X role and in X department as you run the gamut of your life cycle here. Communication, leadership, accountability, and growth mindset. And we teach those. That is our way, that is our gateway in to then doing our learning and development, whether or not it's feedback, whether or not it's presentation, whether or not it's management 1, 2, or 3, leadership. Everything is under this umbrella, which I'm happy that we finally landed on. Otherwise, it was a little nebulous, as your son might tell you. So training and development is big. Opportunities, being able, this sounds maybe silly to many people, but if you were in our world, you would understand going to the Knicks game with Gary, going to a pitch with Gary. Those are things, especially the younger folks, really enjoy. So that's dynamic. Getting time. Everyone's accessible and approachable. There really isn't any hierarchy. Yes, there are levels because that's just how you show growth in a company. But I think the accessibility, the invitation to join us anywhere. If you've never, if you've never been to Los Angeles and Gary's going to Los Angeles, you get a ride. There are opportunities and at bats. You're working on PepsiCo. That's amazing for your resume. You're going to work on Diageo, Jose Cuervo next. Wow, that's pretty cool. And I think the way in which we look at marketing and advertising today is so disruptive and so different that that's also a thing that we can pull. The platform expertise, learning really how to work the back end of TikTok. That might not be important to you and me, but it is important to these other people. And in terms of making sure that we get our consumers on board, like that's it. I believe we have to be in touch with our self-awareness, which we teach a lot of. Emotional intelligence, I teach the whole gamut of. in order to have empathy for that end consumer.
Fabulous. Well, I'm going to put a bookmark there. I'm hoping that those around you have been able to benefit from your wisdom. And I wish you safe travels, and enjoy your trip. And I look forward to being able to spend time together in Vegas on March 11th. It's going to be fun.
Can't wait. Can't wait. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Wow, fabulous. All right. Well, I'd like to now turn our attention to our other two guests with us. Wanted to first start with Lori, and I'd like to also let everyone know too, Lori is also doing a Herculean task. She's had some things with her mouth. She had to have some surgery yesterday, and so she's here with us today, powering through, hopefully not too much pain, and a willingness to be with us. So thank you, Lori, for your kindness and effort to do that. But so as cryptically as possible, you can answer our questions. I'm curious, just broadly, I've had the good fortune to know you now for several years, and we've had an opportunity to talk about various things. But how would you first off, tell us about you and your work, and just your general orientation about kind of how you see the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Carson. It is a delight to be here, and funny mouth and all. And I really appreciate and am stimulated by the conversation from Jim and Claude. And before I introduce myself, I'm just going to invite all of us, the listeners and the panelists, just to take a moment and turn your attention to something beautiful in your space. It could be a photograph you see, it could be a view out a window, it could be a color in your bedroom, wherever you are. Just take a moment just to shift your attention to something that touches the heart. And just take a moment to breathe with that. And just notice what happens. What do you feel? What comes alive in you? Okay. And you can turn your attention back to the webinar. And so if people want to type in the chat, just what did you notice? What did you notice by just taking a little beauty break moment? What do you feel? What do you sense? What do you notice? Ease of heart, relaxed, great. Could be anything. Smile, lightness, great. Space, great. So I just wanted to offer that because there's such a rich amount of information that we're getting that's like stimulating on all levels. And I just want to remind us to open up our attention and connect with what we're experiencing inside with the outside and how the outside affects us on the inside. And that's a lot about the work that I do, frankly. So I have a background actually in marketing and business, and I pivoted I was much more interested in people than I was in selling products. And if there's a chief heart officer position available, or even conceptual, a few decades ago, I certainly would have jumped into that. But I moved from Canada down to California to study transpersonal psychology. And transpersonal psychology is really looking at what are the conditions that help us be more fully alive, more fully human from a cross-cultural perspective, and integrating the body and the heart, not just our personal history, but recognizing that we're part of the history of humanity. So really looking at practices and frameworks of what it means to be fully human. And so I was much more interested in that than I was just simply looking at human pathology and suffering, which is, of course, part of our human experience as well. But I wanted to really look at, what makes us feel alive. And so my clinical work as a psychotherapist is very much helping people orient to that quality of aliveness and flourishing. And for me, where I tap most vividly and viscerally into that is through nature, is through beauty, is through shifting attention to being aware of not only what's challenging in our life, but what could be uplifting and supportive. So I do that with my individual clients, and I also work with organizations, helping people develop cultures of flourishing within organizations with a lot of integration of nature. So nature, that deep knowing and experience, not just conceptual knowing, but deep knowing that we are nature. We are a part of a much vaster experience of life, which can be profoundly resourcing. So it's resourcing from a metaphor level. Like when I'm, with a company I just worked with, actually, we looked at resilience and, okay, so how can you root yourself? How can you feel stable in the midst of uncertainty, layoffs, climate crises, all the layers of crises that we're dealing with at our personal and global level. So nature is metaphor. How do I root? How do I find stability in the winds of change? But nature also as a place of resourcing from a very biochemical, physiological way. When I'm in nature, I feel uplifted, expanded, part of something greater than myself. And we see that science is showing us, like in our nervous system, our biochemistry changes. So I become resourced, and then I can take that back into my relationships at home, my relationships at work, my relationship with myself, because I'm changed. I'm plugged into something much bigger, much faster. So that's a little bit about how I work. I bring nature in as a resource for myself, my clients. I teach retreats with Mark, actually, and support him in his teacher training. But I work with organizations, and really this knowing that there's this interbeing, and we can call it love, we can call it life, but we're not separate.
It's beautiful. So many different things. We were talking recently together about the role of rocks and what rocks can teach us, and about presence in the face of challenge. And I'm curious if you would be willing to share some of your reflections on that experience that you had.
Sure. Yeah. So nature, as I said, it's not just a concept and a great framework that I teach, I live it. And not so recently, about 14 years ago, I was in a near fatal bicycle accident, and I've got chronic injuries from that, and one flared up, an injury in my ankle. It was really, really difficult for me to move at all for about 8 weeks. And in my mind, I had so much fear, so much grief, and my mind I felt separate. I felt separate from the fabric of life. I looked around me, everybody else can walk, everybody else can do this. Like my attention narrowed, which is very common in times of crisis or trauma. Our attention does narrow. But with that, there is this disconnect that happened. And for all the teaching I do with mindfulness and emotional intelligence, I tried to work with my thoughts. Like I was aware I was having catastrophizing thoughts. I was aware of just kind of really circling the drain around a sense of what was possible in my life. And so there is something innate in me that knew that in order, what is flourishing, what is life in the presence of personal and collective trauma. So I knew for me, I had to access a wisdom that's much bigger than my own mind. So I was in a Joshua Tree, couldn't walk very far. And I was actually with Mark, and saw him trot off and go hiking. And I felt that pang, like, oh, I really want to be experiencing this beauty, this majesty. But I sat on a rock because I couldn't walk. And I started to listen to wisdom from deep time, a wisdom so much vaster than my own. And the rocks just spoke to me. And I was journaling, listening to them. And they said, you know, it's not like your life is over. It's not like experience is over. Look at us. We're not moving around. We're not like a river that flows or a bird that flies that can seek experiences. We are here steady, and we come up from the depths. And I was like, oh, and they said, this is an opportunity for you to attune to a different experience of being alive. Like, you're not going to seek experiences anymore. It's about this subtle attunement to what is here now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like, still feel grief in not having the physical mobility and access that I did, but tapping into a wisdom that's deeper, vaster, older than mine gave me perspective and possibility. And later that day, as the dusk was coming in, I was looking out at the vastness of the sky, really, again, like holding this, like, oh, these circumstances are so hard for me. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm not sure what my life is going to be like. And then as the sun started to melt into the horizon and the darkness started to, become richer, I saw the presence of a star, and it might have been Venus because it was really bright. And again, it just had this communication to me, which was, hey, I've been here all along. It just took a change in circumstances for you to see me. And I realized that was a teaching for me. Like, in the moment, I was like, I'm not sure what the future holds for me. I'm not sure what my possibility is, how I'm going to regain my mobility. But the star was like, hey, sister, like, circumstances will change and there will be clarity. You will have more information. So that is kept me, like, it's a resource that is, like, for me, flourishing, especially in times of challenge, uncertainty, crises, requires me to connect with something bigger, vaster, older, and whether that's connection with nature, connection with community, connection with other people. So to me, flourishing is about connection.
It's beautiful. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. So many different directions. I want to turn our attention, and it seems like you and Mark might do a bunch of teaching together. So I'm curious to know, kind of how that looks and learn more about Mark. But before we do that, Tom, is there anything for you that's up? I'd like to make some space here for you.
I'm anxious to bring Mark into the conversation, but just real quick, Lori, I love the sharing that you just brought into the space. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, several years ago, working with the Max Planck Institute, did research on consciousness. And one of the things that the scientists discovered was that rocks have consciousness. I mean, His Holiness already knew that, but we needed here in the West, particularly the quote unquote science to prove that. But I love that you allowed yourself to connect with consciousness of the rock and certainly of the universe to pick up on those messages. And thanks for sharing.
So, Mark, this is one of the first times that we've had an opportunity to meet, and I've known through Lori about your work and spent some time on your site and so forth. But curious to know too from you. Tell us about you. Tell us about your work. What brought you to it? How? I don't want to. It sounds kind of silly, but what is your unique or different perspective that you might share? I'm sure you and Lori align a lot, and is there a difference or not? And so I'm just kind of curious. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Carson, and thanks, Jim and Tom and everybody putting this together. It's really stimulating. So my work is, I'm a Buddhist trained meditation teacher, been in that world, practicing, studying for 40 years, teaching for about 25 years. in the more sort of traditional insight meditation world. But for me, my love, just like for Laurie, has really been my connection and immersion in nature, particularly with a contemplative, mindful presence. And so when I moved to the States in the 90s, my sort of integration of being outside in nature, in the wilderness, wherever it was really, but doing that with mindfulness, with awareness, and realizing that particular combination of going outside with presence, with sensitivity, attunement, receptivity, was just a profound doorway into both all the various wisdom teachings that I'd received through Buddhism and other traditions. All that's really available in nature. Nature's teaching us about connection and transience and beauty and love and letting go, and what really, as Laura was pointing to, what supports equanimity and steadiness and spaciousness, and the beauty of that work for myself. And so but that led me to start sharing my work with people. It's called Awaken the Wild. I've been teaching nature meditation retreats and programs, and now teacher trainings through that organization, Awaken the Wild, really wanting people to rediscover or deepen their connection and their embeddedness and their love of the natural world. And I think, we've become an indoor species, we've become a screen-oriented species, and we're losing what it means to be human. We're losing our understanding and intimacy and connection and love of nature, and misunderstanding what really creates flourishing, what creates well-being, what creates peace and happiness. And so the work that I do is really taking people outside for a day, for a week or longer, immersing themselves in nature quietly, often in silence, attuning to both our animal nature, our senses, and the way that we're intimately connected with life around us. And so I think what's unique about it is really integrating this innate quality of mindfulness and how that deeply connects us to our sensory world, our environment. And what motivates me around the work is the phrase, we protect what we love. We know how the crises, the holy crises that we're in. And I feel like some of that's coming from the fact that we're so divorced from nature, so disconnected from the fact that we are the earth, and what's happening to the earth is happening to us. And so when we go outside with awareness, with mindfulness, then that it touches the heart. And when the heart is touched, we want to care, we want to love, we want to protect, just like we do our children and grandchildren and animals and gardens. And so that's the motivation for me. And nature, I want to just screen share for a second. I woke up tired. I'm a little sick. I've got some kind of bug. And then I turned my attention to this. I looked out the window. Laurie said, "Hey, check out the sunrise." And yes, I was still sick and tired and whatnot. And this opened my world up to something beautiful and profound and spacious. And nature is everywhere. It's on our doorstep. It's out the window. It's in this beautiful orchid that's growing on my desk. If you can see, how do I do that? That's been flowering for 2 years miraculously. And so, but I think, again, back to my work is, because we've gotten so, our minds are busy, our lives are busy and complex, and it's the practice of mindfulness, attention, awareness that really supports receiving the wisdom and the beauty of nature. So thank you, Laurie, for posting some links to my work. I've written some books about it. I can screen share those just for a moment. I've got a couple of books. Actually, this is, let me just put this on. This is actually teacher training that Laurie and I teach. I've been teaching it now for maybe 10 years, training people how to facilitate taking people out into nature with awareness. I've just started a nonprofit called Mindful of Nature, which is trying to support this work getting out there to populations in need, to at-risk youth and other places. And it's inspired by these two books. The first one was Awake in the Wild, Mindfulness in Nature as a Path of Self-Discovery. And then more recently, I've written this field guide, which is basically audio and written meditation practices, 52 mindfulness practices. So there's a practice you can do a day a week. So that's a little snapshot of what I'm doing, what I care about, but I'm happy to open up to questions and have Laurie also chime in because she's very much part of that.
Of course. Wow, it's beautiful. I want to join you at some point on
Please. They're delightful.
There's things you're doing. That's amazing. Wow. So, I think I'm reading Dacher Keltner's book on awe. I don't know if you guys have probably already, Tom, I don't know if you've read it or not, but
wonderful book.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm just getting through it. And the thing that I just keep hearing really in both of you, from you, in my words, my interpretation, is this connectedness, this sense of this rootedness, this passing away from just the embodiment and the artificial boundaries that we think of when we have our bodies, our point of reference, something further, going into a greater, deeper connection. And I'm wondering, would you describe that as a sense of awe? Looking at your sunrise, for instance, this morning or whenever that was taken, immediately it was just, for me, that's where I went. Kind of curious how that shows up for you, both Laurie and Mark, in the sense of your work in nature.
Laurie, do you want to take that first? No? Yeah. So I mean, awe is one of those. I think he points in the research that most people access awe in nature. There's so many things that are awe-inspiring, whether it's a sunrise, whether it's how an orchid blooms for years on my desk, whether it's how leaves figure out how to draw energy from sun and turn it into glucose. We just live in this miraculous, mysterious, beautiful, awe-inspiring planet. And science is also revealing sort of deeper layers of the intelligence and extraordinariness of life. And I think we can know that intellectually, but it's going outside. Like I hiked yesterday for 5 hours in the rain because I love hiking in the rain. I'm English. It's part of my sort of conditioning. And just being with moss on trees and the way the wind's howling on the ridgetops and the way life is blooming in spring with the grasses and wildflowers. And I think it's an essential human quality to feel awe. And partly, as Dr. Keltner so beautifully talks about, it connects us to something bigger than ourselves. It connects us to something we share as a species. And I think that's why I advocate. My main message to people is go outside, go outside, go outside, to your garden, to your balcony, to your neighborhood, to a tree outside the California oak outside my house, because it takes very little to look up at the sky, a night sky, a sunrise sky, to feel that awe and to feel connected to something greater. And it's such an essential human quality that we're losing touch with, as wonderful as our technology is. It rarely inspires awe in the way nature can.
That's fascinating. And I'm just reflecting. And then, Tom, I'll step back and make some space for you if you have something that's up. But on the one hand, we're talking to Claude, and we recognize that people being seen is a nurturing source of flourishing, so that they are recognized and being seen by other for whatever pain they might be carrying or who they might be or any number of other elements to them. So there's that validation. And then at the same time, it's also amazing how moving past oneself in the sense of connecting and moving beyond a sense of self and not necessarily having a gaze of another onto self, but the actual opposite, which is to go to a place to lose sense of self in order to then find that nourishing frame. It's fascinating. I don't know if, that's of interest to you, but it's just something that's just for me. But it's an interesting dichotomy that on the one hand, we both want to be seen, and on another level, we want to also be immersed and to lose sense of self, both of which provide a nourishment. Tom, anything up for you and anything you'd like to speak to or ask?
Yeah, I think, what Mark and Laurie are speaking to, the Japanese for hundreds of years have a practice called forest bathing.
Yeah.
And it's part of the healthcare system in Japan that as a patient is recovering from any kind of medical or psychological emotional condition, they're guided in nature to do forest bathing. And the practice is to use each of your 5 primary senses and attune to each of the senses during the time in nature to what is the softest sound that you notice? What's drawing your attention of your eyes? And going through each of the 5 senses over the span of maybe a half mile or a quarter of a mile in nature over a multi-hour period, it allows the patient to heal through the support of nature. So that's very much alive for me in the conversation that Mark and Lori are speaking to. But I think it's also, you know, in for each of us as human beings operating in organizations or in society, we need to feel safe. And safety only comes from being seen, as you've spoken to, Carson, but it also requires that we be heard. And it requires that we be appreciated. And, you know, that forest bathing technique that I was speaking to and Mark and Lori have talked about is taking the time to appreciate the nature that is around us, taking the time to appreciate the people who are around us, and slowing down to feel that sense of safety because we are seen, we are heard, and we are appreciated. And it's from that we have trust of nature, trust of other human beings, trust of the organizations we work for. And I love how the two of you are helping remind the people you work with of those connections.
It also leads, oh, I'm sorry, Lori, please go ahead.
Well, Laurie, no, please, you, Laurie, go. And I do want to add, but Laurie first.
Just to bridge, I'm appreciating all these comments. And one of the things that I've discovered is that for the most part, not always, but for the most part, nature is a pretty neutral place to train our attention to notice things outside of ourselves. So when you can, like, I've worked with organizations where we do like mindfulness training outside. So it's like, notice all the green things, notice all the textures you see. And so it's turning up the acuity of what it is that we can notice, expanding that aperture of our awareness. Then you can go back into your personal relationships at work with your team. Like how can you, what freshness can you view your teammates from? How can you notice in a new way? I found it's harder to do that in teams, in organizations, in the absence of nature, because there's a lot of filters we have. Like we have judgments, we have ideas of how people should be and our histories. So when we can use nature as a training ground for our attention, then we create the conditions where both uniqueness and connection and interbeingness can be observed simultaneously. So I just think it's a great access point to train those ways of paying attention to not just the world outside of us in nature, but our human nature as well. And to notice like, wow, I have a judgment about like people should be perfect. What in nature is perfect, or I should be perfect. And it's like, oh yeah, I can see that. So it becomes this kind of almost like even like a neutral place to train that. So in that way, it bridges both the being seen as unique and being seen and felt as part of.
Yeah, and if I can just riff on that a little bit, I think all of your various comments about when we go out into nature, one of the things I think it's really important to remember, and it's subtle, is we're always in relationship. And so we might go out into nature to see something, to have an experience, to go for a walk in the woods, to see a sunset, but to also remember, you know, we live in a relational, reciprocal world. And so we're also being seen by nature. We are being experienced by the fox sniffing our scent, and the birds changing their calls as we walk through the forest, and the gophers noticing our vibration as we walk. And so I think it's always important to remember that as we enter any ecosystem in our garden or a forest or wherever, we are entering a relationship. And it's a beautiful, and when we go with that awareness, we go in with sensitivity, with respect, with attunement. And then also there's something beautiful about when we can remember that it reminds us that we're part of. We're not just someone having an experience that's acquisitive, but actually we can also, we're additive to the environment in that moment. We are the forest walking through itself, knowing itself. And that is a very different way of seeing. And then the other thing, when we're sensing nature, seeing us, hearing us, receiving us, one of the things I think is also profound in support of well-being and flourishing is that we usually feel profoundly accepted in nature. We're welcomed. We don't feel judged. Our self-narrative quiets. And so, you know, when we step out of a sort of human-centric world into the more than human world, we start to feel a sort of innate goodness because we're not judging and comparing like we do in a human world. The tree, like I've been walking in the forest and they've been battered by storms and there's branches and this tree split apart and we don't judge it. We just go, oh, it's just beautiful. It's just a tree that's, you know, losing its limbs and its canopy and bark. And so there's something also profound about nature. Teaches us, it welcomes us. It teaches us about resilience and also teaches us we're fine as we are, however we're showing up, grumpy, tired, stressed, you know, whatever, you're welcome. It's just part of your nature. And why wouldn't you express yourself like that today? You know?
That's beautiful. I love that, Mark. Thank you. That was both of your comments too, Laurie. Really tying some things together for me. What comes up in some of what you're speaking to is, again, this notion of the gaze, right? You know, what's looking at me versus not looking at me. How do I then reflect this gaze that I know I'm being looked at, so to speak? And, you know, again, judgments and all of the different evaluations that happen as a result of that. But, and I do love that notion too of gazing or looking at the tree and saying, oh, it's broken, it's split, it's on the decaying cycle of the natural life of all things that, you know, arise and then come and pass out of existence. And there's a process by which that happens. And yet there's, of course, to your point, which has been very helpful for me, there's no judgment about that from me to the tree. It's just the tree and it's just what it is. And the same metaphor and the same application can be applied, of course, as I look to myself, but then also to Laurie, to what you were speaking to when it comes in a practical or a different way of showing back up, say, in an organization that you're working with and showing up with that blank mind, you know, and it also then also brought up for me too the traditional notion of emptiness in a Buddhist sense, right? And looking at being able to, again, to kind of recalibrate one's own view, one's own perspective after having kind of been connected, maybe have a different loss of, not a loss, but a lesser sense of self, kind of wiping the slate, so to speak, of our vision, and then showing back up and seeing the beautiful emptiness in the sense of what presents from the humans that we're working with and having a new view on them. I'm not sure if this is making any sort of sense, but it was beautiful. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Laurie, for those things. Want to just be mindful of the time. Tom, is there anything else that you'd like to speak to at this point?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to this wonderful conversation is just a little bit of a story of there's a young man, technologist, who wanted to find a way to use technology to help with illegal forest deforestation. And he took discarded cell phones and solar panels and installed them at the tops of trees and forest to create an audio signal when there was illegal forestry going on or deforestation going on, thinking they could pick up the sounds of trucks or vehicles, pick up the sounds of chainsaws, and alert the authorities. And one of the unintended consequences they discovered was they started creating this whole audio file and history of what was going on in a forest. And not only was the cell phones, were they picking up the audio track of a chainsaw or a car, But as soon as a human being entered the forest went quiet. And all of the animals were alerting each other. And it just, he's got this extraordinary, I mean, thousands of hours of audio files from forests all over the world. And they're finding species that were presumed to be extinct. They're finding ways of communication with animals in the forest. And so to Mark and Lori and their sharing, when we're going in nature, and we are very much part of nature, it's very alive. And depending on where our consciousness is, depending on how present we are, we notice or we don't notice what's happening. And so I just wanted to share that story to amplify what the two of you are talking to.
That's very cool. Well, I'd like to invite Jim back in. And as he's coming in, I'd also like to point everybody's attention to some threads in the chat where you can find both further information about Mark's work and Lori's work. And just to put Lori on the spot, because I think so highly of her, I look forward, Lori, to when you write your book, and I can't wait to read it.
We love.
So
We'll
anyway,
have you on Humanity Rising to promote it.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Lori and Mark. This has been very deep, as we conclude 5 days on flourishing. And I want to just pick up on what Tom just said about, the cell phones in the forest. And, that when a human enters the forest, everything goes quiet. We've all heard the observation that if the human race went extinct, all the other species would cheer. And I was starting to think that thought, Mark, when you were talking about, you go into a forest and a tree falls down or something happens and you just take it as part of the natural order, but when you go into society and someone falls down, all kinds of complex emotions emerge. So that even though we're part of nature, there's also an unbridgeable chasm between humanity and nature. As part of the complexio that we wrestle with. We bathe, we do sunbathing, nature bathing in nature, and then we come out of nature and we kind of revert to that which is unnatural somehow. And in the midst of it, we talk about flourishing and we yearn for flourishing, which means we have to go back inside nature, to kind of find that natural way of flourishing. And I would love to hear both of you just comment on this seeming contradiction of being in nature, but in some existential way, we're not of nature. And how you bridge that in your own sense of how one flourishes.
Mark.
Do you want me to go? Okay. Well, I would have to disagree in that, we are nature, we can't be anything else. We are Earth. I think the problem with the word nature is it objectifies and separates and makes a duality. We are Earth, right? We're expressions of the Earth. We might be a slightly or very odd idiosyncratic expression. I don't think we are in our nature. What we've created in our structures and our technology and our plastics and our removal from the natural world, that's something that's very sort of unnatural in the history of the evolution of this planet. But I think look at it, we're animals, right? We're fleshy, instinctual creatures that have a very developed, cerebral cortex, but we are nature. And our houses, a house, what is it? It's a forest, right? It's expression of nature. It's just we've adapted nature in very unusual ways. But I think I think what going outside just reminds us of, oh, I still am an organic sensory animal that has a very developed prefrontal cortex, but I'm essentially of the earth, breathing, completely and utterly interdependent with breath, with nutrients, with mycelium, with organic life. And we'll go back to the earth and compost the earth just like every other life form. So I want us to remind us that we are still of the earth. We just have created strange systems and structures and cities that sadly remove us from knowing that nature. And that's why it's so important that we go outside. But I want to give time for Laurie to share too.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that it depends on the scale you're looking at. Like, yes, we are nature. There's nothing on this planet that's not nature, except if we look at how we've extracted elements and from systems. That's where we're shifting the natural flow of things. That all things on nature exist and thrive and flourish as part of a system. When we extract something and then, amplify that one thing, whether it's plastics from petroleum, that becomes a problem. But if you look at the material in our cell phones, they're minerals, it's nature, but we've extracted it. And so I think it gives nature, once again, gives us this teaching that when we separate something from the whole, it can create problems. And so when we recognize that what thrives, what flourishes is interbeing, and that's the substrata of all of life, then and there is no separation. So not only can we go into nature by visiting like less human created things that benefits us, it also helps us to take care of our source of life, right?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Tom, do you want to make a comment, and then maybe Carson, you can wrap us up?
Yeah, just a big thank you to Laurie and Mark for joining us today, Claude for being here, and a huge thank you to Carson for the week. It's been a wonderful week to focus on thriving, particularly following last week's week on artificial intelligence, and it's a nice counterbalance to last week. So thank you, Carson.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, too, for the invitation, to you as well, Jim. It's always an honor to be able to participate in this community and to bring forward some voices. Particularly grateful with Mark and Laurie and also Claude, various Herculean efforts to arrive and to be present. Very, very much appreciated. I hope the listener has been able to enjoy and or find some inspiration in some of the folks that we've brought forward this past week, particularly as a I don't want to say counterbalance or antidote, but in honor and or recognition of the themes that Jim brings up every morning, with some of the massive pain and challenge that's happening in one particular part of the world right now, not to exclude, of course, the constant suffering, both massive and individual, and its presence everywhere. Of course, not to take away from that or what have you, but anyway. So I hope it's been helpful, and thank you again.
Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Tom, Mark, Laurie. That'll bring us to a close for today, everyone. Next week, we're going to have another 5-day program following on Flourishing on energy medicine and how we can use the energy of the body to heal ourselves in very, very practical ways. So that'll be next week on Humanity Rising. You're all welcome to the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received the link in your Zoom invites. So that'll bring it to a close for today. Have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday. Bye for now.